I'd like to thank my patrons for making this video possible, especially Ellie Dubois, who I've heard can summon demons at will, and the legion that is summoned therein obeys Ellie not because of a sense of obedience or propriety, but because of respect. All right, so Pandemonium. Here we go. I have wanted to do some design process stuff on this channel again for a while. This is a drawing of Pandemonium from Paradise Lost that I did over 2 years ago now. I think it's been about 2.5 years. And I did this in Procreate. It's rather large. If I zoom in here, you can see that all of the little parts and corners of this drawing are like their own detailed little drawing on their own. But I had a great time doing this drawing. I remember having a ton of fun. I remember going in here and doing all these little patterns and circles and filigrees and designing the rosette on this window. And it was really the first time I'd done anything like that in one of my personal drawings. Stupid. But when I started getting up here and I got to indicating the sheer scale of Pandemonium and some of the big towers disappearing into the distance. And when I started getting up here, I realized the bigness is a problem because it's not big enough. It's not big enough. I'm a total crazy person. I was like, this just made me want to do more. And as much as I kind of forgot that I drew this Cerberus in here. I'm glad I did that. I started looking at this and I said, this has made my sense of scale for Pandemonium, this palace for all of the demons in hell, spiral wildly out of control. And I want to do it. And in contrast to the mental model that I have in my head, even though there's a lot going on in this drawing, it's still just one structure. And you can kind of see the implication of a lot of other stuff going on in the background with all of these trippy angles and impossible non-Euclidean geometries going on, but it still just feels like one big church they're going to put up or something like that, which is about right for what John Milton says in Paradise Lost, but it got big. What Milton says in the poem about it is bigger than just the one building, at least in my interpretation, right? After they have the Stygian council and Satan goes off to find Earth and to create despair from all of God's positive plans, all of the other devils stay behind in hell and they do all sorts of stuff. There's a beautiful little part of the poem where Milton describes how they amuse themselves either exploring hell or relaxing, presumably in Pandemonium, and describe some of the things they do to relax. My favorite one being that they sit around doing bad philosophy where they reason themselves into evil. And that just makes me think that, all right, if they're going to do that and live in this place, then it's really like a place and it can be much bigger. And I just got back from Italy. And when I was in Italy, I was seeing places like this, the Colosseum. The fanny pack was really a bold choice for a man already so lacking in panache. Saw places like this, just beautiful fountains decorating everywhere. This is Rome, of course. Rome is an incredible place. I don't know if you've ever heard that they have stuff like that. They've got that there. Very baroque. That's my kind of taste for this kind of stuff. I loved it. It was a beautiful vacation, but it was just about when I was walking around here, Vatican City, and seeing St. Peter's. This is Pandemonium. This is what Pandemonium is. Pandemonium isn't just dark St. Peter's Basilica. It's the whole city. That's its scale. It's big. People need to live there. Demons need to live there. So there's restaurants and walkways and plazas and gardens and homes and all sorts of things and multiple basilicas, churches, cathedrals, whatever, not just one. And that's great because it only asked me to design a whole city. So of course I was like, yeah, let's do it. That sounds like a good thing. Yeah, that's it right there. That's all I ever want to draw. That's the stuff. Look at all the colors. That's Santa Maria della Fiore. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. Case in point, I put that together. That was my idea for the design. And I was like, I got to do this. Let's do this. And this is going to contrast a bit with some of the classic images of Pandemonium. Specifically for me, John Martin's are the archetypal winners, right? They really say Pandemonium to me. John Martin's, this is one of them, has the scale, has the bigness. And he did it as one huge temple. But now that I have this like city scale idea, I'm like, that could be a city. You know, that could just be one gigantic, there could be all sorts of stuff going on there. It would kind of be boring if it was all vast empty walkways, right? There should be markets in there. There should be different activities. Here's another Pandemonium. This is John Martin's painting of Pandemonium. I'm pretty sure I saw this one at the Met years ago. It was part of like a curated lead up to the Hudson River School painters. They were like showing some of the history of scale in pictures to explain how the Hudson River painters got obsessed with it and trying to make things feel big and vast. I want to do something different. I'm going to start looking at it piecemeal because that's how I understand environments. You guys have seen the kind of work that I do. I draw single figures, objects, things like that. That's really my gateway to most ideas. Piece by piece, you build the environment out of separate objects that you can sort of sync into. Now that I'm blowing it out even wider, the only way I can imagine tackling it is looking at smaller elements first, getting a feel for the environment, and then stitching it all together. Another John Martin, the inside of Pandemonium. Big, big, big scale. And here's one of Gustave Doré's depictions. His folio for Paradise Lost has a couple depictions of Pandemonium, but I've always loved the twisted version of the classical type. There's columns, there's pediments, there's friezes. It just feels so fitting, really aligned with the sort of self-aggrandizing nature of Satan and the demons. And I just want to throw a bit of a baroque twist on it, slightly more playful than my usual style. I design different than I illustrate. So if you guys are used to seeing my pencil drawings, for example, I consider those more my illustrations, my fine art, whatever you want to call them. They're like drawings. They're like single pictures. I actually don't draw that way when I design because I want to do this as sort of a design portfolio and use it as a way to show you all what a design process might look like for something of this scale. I'm going to draw more that way. Not quite that way. I'm going to do it traditional, a lot of it, at least a lot of the initial ideation. I'm going to do traditional, which I wouldn't do for work these days, but we'll see. We'll probably wind up, out of necessity, translating a lot of those ideas into digital finals as we move on. My process begins usually with a step that people might take for granted, but that I like to say outright. The first step in my process is have an idea. Did you have an idea that you actually like? Which segues with step 2, which is reference gathering. Just do you have some sort of touchstone for what form language, what physical form will help you do that idea? And I already explained it. For me, it's Rome, right? It is sort of the taste and the stylings of Rome, just with a dark, evil spin on them. I have step 1 of my process, which is I had a damn idea and I had reference gathering. I went to Rome. I was there and I was staring at it for weeks and getting inspired by it. And you saw I have vacation photos. But when I happened to sketch something that reminded me of something I saw in Rome, I didn't have to go Google it. I got to do something a little more personal and go back through my vacation photos and be like, did I take a picture of that corner of a statue or that thing at a museum or something like that? Then this next step is a step that not every design necessarily needs, right? You don't need to do this step, and that is regurgitation. Just spit out a lot of ideas fast in ways that inspire you with all sorts of different mediums and just try different tools, just whatever. What the heck do you want to be in this thing? What do you actually want to have in the product, right? Because right now, I actually have no idea. I need to spend some time just sketchbooking to regurgitate my ideas. I could just write a list, but then I wouldn't have footage. So let's go to footage. Let's get going. So here I am. I'm in my Moleskine large size sketchbook. It's the big one. I forget the exact measurements. What is it? I think it's A3, but I don't know what that means because I use imperial measurements. I think it's 16 inches by, oh God, I'll just look it up. Okay, A3 is 11.7 inches by 16.5 inches. So it's the bigger Moleskine. the sketchbook line, not the notebook paper line. And I'm drawing there with a, what's that? That's a 0.7, I think, Pentel mechanical pencil, and it's got HB lead in it, but you can draw with whatever at this stage. Like I said, this is the regurgitation stage, not a real stage. Don't get caught up. Don't think that the design process is some solid secret thing that designers know and that you're supposed to do all the steps in a certain order. No, not at all. Everybody has their own process, and you invent your process for yourself, and you change it and you adapt it for the thing that you're working on. And in this case, because of how big this project was in my head and how many moving parts there were, like I said in the intro, I needed a spit it out stage. Figure out what the heck you're going to say stage. Try to see what's in your head a little bit stage. And that's what this is. And we're going to do a few sketches on this page that I do in this video. And I'm sure more videos after this one, a few after this one, I would guess, are going to be the continuation of the regurgitation stage, just finding out what I want to be in this city scale design. So let me give you a little bit more context for where I think what I'm doing fits in right now. So I'm just drawing a statue to start. Why? I don't know, because it seems for a city like Rome, which is the main inspiration for how I want to handle this, one of the big iconic things that defines the character of that environment is the nature of the art that's in it. And I personally just connect with that stuff. As an artist, as someone who loves going to museums and loves seeing sculpture and old art, it's just, this is an artifact that's appropriate for the design, but it's also just some of my favorite stuff in the world. So it's on the nose. So I'm using this as a gateway. And I do mean it like a weird psychedelic trip gateway. Like I am using this to, here's an object that is easier to envision than an entire city, right? And I'm going to try to concretize and elaborate my mental model of it by drawing it. And that will make it so that when I close my eyes and try to imagine myself being there, I have an anchor. So I can close my eyes and I can imagine myself being in this big wide plaza in Pandemonium with all of these mosaic tile floors and incredible sculptures. And I can place this one that I'm working on right there in front of me in my mind's eye. Then I can say, okay, what's 20 degrees to the left? And because I've created some amount of reality to this with the first sketch, hopefully it will incline me to have a bar of reality for whatever is 20 degrees to the left, whether it's a church or a walkway or a well or something like that. And obviously I can already kind of do that, right? I've been thinking about this long enough that if I sort of go on a little fantasy, a little daydream, I can already imagine things with a pretty high level of vividness. But doing this work of taking a closer look at the constituent elements is hopefully going to only make that better. So that's the psychedelic part of it. But the practical part of it, how does looking at the pieces first help? Because probably if you've been checking out art education and stuff like that, you might get the sense that the general way that someone would advise that you tackle something like this is, oh, well, why don't you do a silhouette study of the whole city, right? Like its skyline or something like that. And I get that. I totally get that in the way that I don't get it at all. Because imagine if you thought that you could capture the nature of New York City by drawing its skyline with the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building. Yeah, it's iconic, but does it tell you anything about what it's like to breathe the bar garbage that's on the streets in the morning? Does it tell you anything about what it's like to be harangued for hesitating for a moment before you step onto the subway? No, it doesn't. And those things are the real stuff that constitutes the real character of my beloved home, not the arbitrary shapes of the skyline. So to work that pulled out, that pulled back, that's not the effect I'm going for right now, right? John Martin already nailed it. with his designs for Pandemonium, with his incredible painting that I showed in the intro for Pandemonium. He's got it, right? Like Doré's depiction of Pandemonium. Done. I don't need to compete with them, right? But they went for the skyline. They went for the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, and I'm looking for something different. I want to imagine, I really want to know what it would be like for those damn demons to sit around in some Pandemonium garden or some villa on the outskirts of Pandemonium and do bad philosophy and reason themselves into evil. All right, that's what I'm into. That's what I want. And for that, I've got to look at getting harangued on stepping onto the subway. That's the scale of engagement and scale of design that I need to delve into to, let's face it, satisfy myself on these completely super specific points that I want to hit. Okay, and I know that every time that I say I'm going to talk about the practical, I get cerebral. So, okay, here's really it, the practical. If I draw the pieces first, when I go to do the complex drawings that show a whole plaza, a whole street, a whole church, I have a much easier time doing those. If at every step I'm not asking myself, what statue is this? What plinth is this? What do these buildings look like? What does a doorknob look like? What does a wall sconce look like? What does a brazier look like in this world? There's no way around it. If you're going to start pulled back, right? Let's say that the general to specific order would be something like doing the skyline and then going down to block level, then street level, then home level, then room level, right? If you were going to do that, let's face it, once you're on the second step, once you're on the block or street level, the picture is made up of really specific designed out stuff or stuff that should be designed out that you haven't designed yet, right? So that makes slogging through those layouts, doing those scenes that show a bunch of demons walking through a plaza with all of these statues in it, a super heavy lift. It turns it into a super heavy lift because you need to design all that stuff on the fly. Instead, you start, it's almost like a middle out thing, right? These aren't the tightest details. You know, this might be like a 40-foot tall sculpture in the middle of a plaza or the basis for some fountain or something like that. It's more middle out, right? I'm looking at things at this scale. They give me a mix of understanding the form language both on macro scales and micro scales. And then they become a collection of pre-designed stuff that takes up real estate so that when I go do the more complex layouts, I don't need to I don't need to invent everything on the fly. I can look at the design drawings that I've already done. And if I know this drawing needs to have a big, impressive statue in the middle of the plaza, I just lift the one that I already designed. And same goes for hopefully as much else as possible that is in the picture. So in the long run, this will help a lot, even though, you know, if you were a regular viewer just looking at this stuff, is not going to get a sense for the whole environment just yet, you know, and that's the nature of design work. I just have to be okay with that, right? Design drawings like this are not made for regular viewers. They're not made for a general audience. They simply don't tell enough. This is, well, it's really only for me, right? But it's also for other artists. Other artists understand this stuff. Other artists have the imagination to breathe life into it and to imagine the people walking behind and in front of this big statue. But a general audience, they're not going to be able to get on board until the end of the process, when they're really seeing just, here's the whole scene. Here's really what everything looks like. That's when the general audience gets on board. And that's just something that you have to accept about design work. And it goes for most all forms of design work, right? We tend to take for granted as artists, because we've been immersing ourselves in people's sketchbooks and rough work for years, probably, right? And we love that stuff. We tend to take for granted that a general audience gets what this stuff is. And I promise you, they do not. If you show a general audience things like this, people who are not quote unquote into art, just people who will intersect with this idea because it's, you know, now a relevant property or it got turned into a whole story or something like that. If they see stuff like this, they really have a lot of trouble figuring out what the heck you're trying to say, right? It's just not the kind of stuff they're used to seeing. So they don't get on board until later. All right, so that's a lot of the practicals there. That's kind of the context of where this fits in. So you saw me just drawing with the pencil. I just laid it in generally, sketching figures, just relying on my general anatomical and figurative draftsmanship. And now I am going in, I'm doing a second pass with a pigment liner. So I believe that's a Staedtler, I want to say, and that's the really small size right now. But this one is waterproof. And because I know I'm going to do a marker pass over this, I'm using the most light fast waterproof inks that I have access to. So this goes down pretty bold. And this is a really small sketch, so it's really hard to shove much detail in here. I should be clear, it's a really small sketch for the nature of the content, right? For 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 figures, maybe an eighth implied with the knee on the right, and that shows up. But this is a really small sketch to have this much content in it, so that's why I'm using the very smallest fine liner for this one. And you will notice that I don't do the best job here. This is not my usual medium. I actually don't do this stuff a lot anymore. I used to do pen and marker a lot in school, especially marker. Did a lot of marker work back when I was like 19, 20, 21, 22, like those years of my life, getting into school and in school in the foundation years. A lot of marker work, got a lot of marker mileage, had to do a lot of homework in markers. So I do have a lot of mileage with that, but I just haven't used them very much at all in the intervening years. It's been a very long time. So I'm rusty with this stuff. I was never really quite good at it. It's not my kind of thing. You guys know the kind of work I do. I like to build up form, and this sort of locking it down at this stage with these very graphic lines, it's not really how I think anymore. So I don't do the best job, but that begs the question, why did I do this at all? A couple reasons. First off, the way that I draw in pencil, it would just take too long. I know me. If I started this in pencil and it was going to get rendered out in pencil, I would just get stuck on it immediately, and this would turn into a, God only knows what would it be, like a 30-hour drawing to render out this statue here. But because I picked, all right, I know I'm gonna force myself to lock it down with ink, and I'm just gonna do the values with a marker pass, I just cannot get the level of form and detail with the markers that I can with pencil. So that prevented it from becoming a 30-hour drawing, and instead it was, I don't know, I think I did this statue design in like 4 hours, something like that. So that's very useful to just force me to compress the time, make me think a little bit simpler. The other thing is that I don't want to know what this looks like exactly just yet, I love drawing in pencil, and it is usually the medium that gets the very best results from me. I know the way these drawings came out and the way that I expect other drawings like this are going to come out. They're not my best, and I don't need them to be, right? And I don't think the ones that I did are super great, right? I see how they could be better, and I can see how they would be way better as just pencil drawings. I know how I can make them much better by just doing them as regular pencil drawings. But the problem is that if I do them as pencil drawings and render them out the way that I usually draw, that'll be it. They'll be done. Once I love it, I'll love it. And I also will close the door to a lot of color options. That's a particular problem that arises for me over and over and over again. Because when I render and develop in straight pencil, I am only concerned with form. I rarely, if ever, have the foresight to make any concessions to color in how I'm rendering. So I don't group values to indicate local value changes. Like I just draw everything as if it's made out of white marble, because it's very frustrating in graphite pencil to make a whole area of the drawing be significantly darker than another area such that it would read as, oh, this material is black and this material is white, right? Pencil fights you on that. It just wants you to do light versus shadow, just the very biggest differences in value. And the more of the contrast range that you give up to particular local values, the more it fights you. So usually when I dive in on designing something with just a pencil, yes, I get my most interesting lines, I get my most accurate scales, I get my coolest details, and I get the most appealing picture at the end, generally, from what I can tell. But I also lock in, and then I start pulling my hair out, trying to have anything like a color idea for it, or a local value idea for it, or to be willing to have it be something completely different, to shift it. So by working in different mediums and in different methods and switching up the scale and limiting my time, this is going to keep me from locking in on one thing exactly too early. You know, I don't want that. Yeah, the drawings take a hit, but it will hopefully be healthy for the project in the long term. Oh, and that's another thing that I should say, context-wise. These drawings that I do in this video, and the ones that I'll do after this, I'm sure, do I expect that these drawings will go into the, let's say, the final design book, the little portfolio, maybe 15 to 20 pages long, showing the design work that I did for Pandemonium? Maybe they might be useful for fluff, but probably not. I'm expecting already, I'm very open to the idea that all of this work, just why would it be ready for showtime right off the bat? It wouldn't, right? All of this it's just gathering data. It's gathering data on what I think this place looks like, and also what I think this place doesn't look like. Every bad drawing that I do in this exploration, regurgitation stage, it's not just a bad drawing, it's not just a flop, it's also data. It's teaching me I don't want this to look like that, and that's very useful. And the last thing that hopefully working in these different mediums does for me is that it makes me give up on the idea that I'll be able to do my best drawing. That's good. I think that's good. That may sound bad, but I'm not sure that that's a bad thing. Not in the exploration phase. If I'm working in my most comfortable medium, right? If I'm working in pencil, every drawing has the potential to be like, oh, this is the best pencil drawing you've ever done. That has a really strong emotional charge for me. And that's dangerous for this kind of stuff, because it'll make me lock up and try to channel everything into the types of things that make my best drawings, right? And what that does, or what it might do, is it'll make me obsess with the how of what I'm doing instead of the what. And right now I need to worry about the what. I can't be caught up on the how, right? What I want for myself at this point in the process is to only be asking myself, like, what's going on in this statue? What does this statue say about this culture? What does this statue say about the city? What does this statue say about how the fallen represent themselves and their history? How does this statue explain how they want others to interpret them, what their community is like, how they want to encourage themselves or change their own mentalities? Like, that's the stuff I want to think about. That's the stuff. That's the important stuff. That's what I believe I should be thinking about at this stage. And if I'm worried about the how, right? Like, all right, I got to get these values perfectly flat. It needs to have better shapes. Like, yeah, that's all important for a really nice drawing, but I think it's got to happen later. We got time. Let's do it later. Let's focus on the what for a little bit. And hopefully, if I feel like I'm drawing like a little kid, right? Like with my fine liners out, and then I'm coloring in the lines like you're seeing me start doing here. And I'm just like, oh, this part's red, this part's blue, this part's yellow. Hopefully that will make me calm down, let go a little bit. I know that I'm not an ink and marker artist, right? So I have no realistic expectation that I'm going to make one of my best pieces in this medium that I just don't have a lot of mileage with. I don't don't care about as much as pencil, right? It will hopefully flip a switch in my brain that's like, all right, don't worry about it. This isn't going to be your best one. You're just drawing like a kid. You're having fun. They're mediums you're familiar with and you have enough facility with, but it's not going to be your killer, right? So just concentrate on the what. What are you drawing and why do you care about it? And how can you make the idea cool? And that's probably what you want to be feeling when you're designing, right? If you're really trying to design, and hopefully I am trying to design. I think this is a design task for me. And it's different. You can see that it's different, right? I mean, my pencil Paradise Lost pieces seek design in a different way than I'm approaching it here. I don't, like if you look at my pencil Paradise Lost pieces, I don't wish there was a video game of those, right? Like all of the strange abstract, I'm literally drawing them. My hope would be that I'm drawing them in such a way that they probably couldn't possibly be animated, right? Like I want to, it's part of my design criteria for those pencil drawings that they're really too elaborate, too strange, too nonsensical at moments, and there's too much blending of abstract and concrete and figurative that just would never work if any of these things like moved, right? There's too much just filigree and anatomy mixing with polymorphic arabesques to ever allow that to move around. You couldn't rig it, right? It would just look all weird as it was all demorphing and stuff like that. It's just meant to be a still black and white image. And if you moved it, it would break. And if you colored it, it would break, right? That's one of, I don't want to go into too much detail about this because it's really like a different project, right? They're all Paradise Lost, but different project, right? I'm approaching them completely different ways. But that was specifically part of my criteria for those drawings. I have a document somewhere on my computer where I literally write that. I say that I want that. I think the way that I put it to myself so long ago, I mean, this was a long time ago. I was like, I want to draw them in such a way that they could only be drawings, to remove the feeling that they're waiting to become something else, right? That was a big part of how I wanted those pieces to feel. And I love that. And it felt like a real culmination, that idea. And when I finally got some stuff that I felt actually did it, it felt like a culmination of a lot of like drawing philosophy and problems that I had had in my drawings for a long time. I had suffered for a long time from this nagging feeling that I was always doing something that it just wasn't done. It was like, all right, well, now you should paint it, or now it should become a 3D model or something like that. And it was like ruining my fun a lot of the time. So one of the reasons that I started that project that way was it was medicinal. It was like, all right, well, if we can find a way to make it so that it should only be a drawing, that might cure it. And it did, right? So that's one thing. But now this task is the other thing. This, I would love to see a video game where you can like walk through Pandemonium, right? Or like some VR experience or something like that. And that's what I'm coming into this project with in mind. So very different way of drawing, very different way of designing, which is great fun as far as I'm concerned. And then I can always pluck the weirdest, best stuff that I got in this whole process. I can always pluck it out and then plunk it into the more surreal, the more impossible version of the pencil drawings. And it will only be all the better for all of the design thought that has already gone into it. Okay. That's a lot more context, so let's talk about how we're wrapping this drawing up here. So I flattened it in with Copic markers. If you're wondering what markers those are Copic markers. It's a mix of the standard Copic marker and the Copic sketch markers that have the big, flexible, sort of almost paintbrushy nib. And I did pretty sure I used nothing but the cool grays on this first statue. And I believe that the range I used was C1, C3, C5, probably, maybe C7 for some darks. But Copics are great. They're very, very good markers. I use a couple other different kinds. I have a couple colors that I use Prismacolors just because I have them lying around. I have a bunch of add markers, which are, wow, they're so stinky and probably super toxic. But I have a bunch of add markers laying around. And I also use Tombow markers, but I don't use them here because they are water-based instead of alcohol-based. So they don't play well with the Copics in my experience. When you layer them over each other too much because they have different mediums, they kind of interact poorly. They make one or the other peel up or start spotting or something like that. So I try to stay either to just the water base or just to the alcohol base. And I do the third drawing that I do in this video is done with my fountain pen, and the ink in that fountain pen is very resistant to the alcohol markers, but it is not waterproof. So if I had put the Tombows over it, they would have washed it out immediately. So just some considerations to have there. These pigment liners that I used for this one, they will resist either. They're protected from either water or a solvent like alcohol. But like I said, it's just that you don't want the two types of markers to necessarily mix. And if you've never tried these, if you've never tried working with markers, they are a great tool. There's a learning curve. There's definitely a learning curve. Like I said, I used them a lot back in college. So it's been a long time, but I have plenty of practice with them and pretty like aggressive practice. This is the medium that I sort of like got boot camped through doing geoforms. You know, I like rendered like, what was it? I took this night class once that was a basics of communication sketching. And our homework every week was to render in marker 6 spheres, 6 cubes, 6 cylinders, 6 cones. And one week, all 6 of those pages, they're exact duplicates, right? It's raw mileage. You know, all 6 of those pages are white spheres, cones, cylinders. The next week is they're all gray. The next week is they're all black. The next week is they have stripes. So it starts adding up pretty quickly, right? After I did hundreds. I did hundreds in marker and more advanced exercises than that in marker as well, and did plenty of design work. And that was just one class. Then I had more classes where I had to do a bunch of stuff in marker. So a lot of marker work. It has faded away. I've definitely forgotten a lot of my old tricks, but I don't have as steep a learning curve as someone who is new. But the good thing about them is that they go down fast, they go down bold, they go down clear. It's clear how to layer them as well, which is not something that you get from the most comparable medium, which is watercolor. As I understand it, markers like Copics were invented to replace watercolor, to sort of be a faster way to put down watercolor. And they are faster, I suppose, but they're not as flexible. But what you get in return is that it's very clear how to layer them, right? Because as you can see with the one I'm using now, that's a C5, I think it is. It's a little blurred out, but there's numbers to them, right? You know, this is cool gray number 1. It's the lightest gray. Oh, you want it darker? Well, go over to cool gray number 3, then number 5, then number 7. If you hold all 5 in your hand, you can gradate from the very lightest tone to the darkest tone pretty smoothly if you have a little bit of craft under your belt and you move quickly, right? Once they dry, they're down and it's very hard to get them to pick up cleanly. But on that first pass, on that first juicy pass, because they're numbered, it can be really clear how you're actually supposed to layer them. And they're always darkening each other as well. They're kind of like a multiply layer in Photoshop. So that's a nice little cage to contain your ideas for how you're going to shade your pictures or color them. They're a great tool. They're a great tool. If you've ever been curious, I recommend that you try them out. Oh, their other problem, they're not cheap. Markers are really not cheap. One Copic marker is like, well, I don't know what they are now. I haven't bought one in a long time, but one Copic marker is like, I want to say $7, you know? You got to wait for there to be a sale. You got to get a deal. You got to buy the packs that come at a discount. Buying them individual they're expensive. Markers are really expensive, but they're a good tool. They're a really good tool. I haven't bought one in a long time. A lot of the ones that you're seeing me use here are markers that I've had for, years and years and years and refilled them. For these gray tones, I have a lot of refill cartridges that I just keep adding more of the ink to that one marker instead of buying a new one. I don't have it for the colored ones, unfortunately, but if you do go into markers, I recommend ordering or going to a store that has those refill cartridges and loading up on those as well. They save tons of money in the long run. And if I could give any craft advice for markers, the one thing most people don't know until someone tells them is flooding. That's a very useful technique with marker. So there's a very strokey way you can use marker. So for example, the way that you see I've done the shading with the C5 on the statue so far, where I've picked out shadow shapes, and it's just like on the figures, it's clear, it's strokey, it's almost like a little brush stroke. But to get flat areas and to get gradations, you generally want to use a technique called flooding, right? You can get gradations by streaking the marker and sort of, hatching one color into another, but you can get really soft gradations with flooding. All flooding means is you pool the marker in an area, you swoosh it around and let it really soak into the paper before you move on to the next area. So you go really slow and you flood the paper with the ink. A couple considerations there. One, you need good paper, right? So this Moleskine paper is really tough, so it can actually handle it. It soaks up the marker pretty aggressively, but a lot of papers really can't handle it. So because it's alcohol-based solvent, it'll start tearing up the surfaces really fast on a lot of papers. If you want the most durable surface for markers, you should try marker paper. It's a really interesting paper. I actually have a sheet of marker paper underneath this sheet in my sketchbook to absorb any bleed through that would get onto the next page. There's nothing I can do about the back of the page. The back of the page is screwed. It is completely messed up. It looks like a ghost image of the sculpture. But if you put a sheet of marker paper or a couple sheets of regular cartridge paper underneath that sketchbook page, then you can prevent the markers from, when you're flooding, from biting through 3 pages of your sketchbook and just making them unusable. So definitely recommend doing that. It's very frustrating when you are into a marker drawing and then you realize you forgot to put the dummy sheet underneath and you're like, crap, I just ruined 3 unnecessary pages in my sketchbook. I could have saved them. So do try to remember to put some sort of intermediary page in there. And just to go back to flooding for a second, flooding gives you the flat values on areas. So when I laid in the first tone, that was the silhouette for this sculpture, I flooded the whole thing. I just went real slow and I just went in little circles and I really made sure that the ink was building up in that area. People resist that. They don't know a lot. It doesn't occur to a lot of people that you can do that. And also because these markers are so damn expensive a lot of the time, you think it's crazy to flood that much unnecessary ink into that area because you're wasting your expensive ink. But it is the best way to get a flat tone. You get a nice even effect. And then if you flood an area and it has all of this extra solvent sitting on the surface, and then you take a marker of another color or another value and flood into that area, that's how you get a soft gradient. There's so much extra alcohol sitting pooled on the surface that when the pigments meet, they can't possibly make a hard edge and you get a soft transition. And if you flood enough, you can gradate softly as many colors as you want and get really cool effects and burn through your bank account because you're going to be eating up markers like crazy. Here's another little tip. If your marker is dying and you really need it to last you because you're flooding or something, you can put the tip of the marker in your mouth. Be careful. I wouldn't do it with an ad marker, right? I wouldn't do it with an ad marker, which is really stinky. But with a Copic, just put it in your mouth. Don't let it touch your mouth. Just put it in your mouth or near your mouth and go, and just fog it with a broad breath. And the extra moisture that you're adding will get a few more sessions out of the marker. Trust me, it works. I learned all of that from the teacher who taught that communication sketching class that I took at Art Center's night program years and years ago. He was also the teacher who told me that I don't have it and that I should give up art. I guess the verdict's still out on that. The verdict is still out. This clip is just showing that I took a little break from doing the statue, or I guess I thought the statue was done, and I just whipped out a small sketchbook and I just started sketching around and looking for a next idea, a new idea. So I brought out my fountain pen. That's my Pilot Lucina with the fine tip with sepia Pilot ink in it. And I just started goofing around, just started looking for, I thought these would be like wall sconces maybe, or maybe some sort of bust decoration on top of like a thin pillar or something like that. I just didn't exactly know what I wanted to draw next, what design I wanted to draw next. And so I just started sketching around. I did not know at this point that the ink in my fountain pen was resistant to markers and was not resistant to water base. I knew that it couldn't take water. Like I can rub that ink out with spit to get some values, or I can brush over it with a watercolor pen that has water in it, and it'll completely bleed the ink away. So I had actually just assumed that any ink that would give way to water that quick would not survive alcohol. And I felt embarrassed when by chance later on working on these pages, I found out that is not the case. I was like, my God, how long have I been drawing and doing stuff like this that I did not know that not all water-based inks or non-waterproof inks are not also not, how do I put this? What am I trying to say? I didn't know that if an ink was not resistant to water, it might still be resistant to alcohol, solvent, markers. I had no idea. Now I know. So if I had known that at that time, I might have thrown some marker washes down on those little heads that I drew, but I didn't know it at the time. And then I didn't like them. So this is where I wanted to show this because this is where I started getting the idea of I should design some paintings, which is really fun because it's like, well, I mean, you could just do paintings, right? But there's like a Russian nesting doll thing going on where it's like full paintings are part of this bigger project. I just love that. I think it's so over the top, so baroque and so demanding that it tickles me. So I started with that sketch on the right in sort of a weird like pointed canvas idea that I saw in an area above the entrance to a cathedral when I was in Florence. And that middle one, the round one, I got super inspired when I saw one of Michelangelo's paintings in a round canvas and a round frame when I was at where was that? I think that was at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Those kinds of frames are called tondos, I think. So I started sketching that. You saw me, I had the compass out and I was doing the indication of the round frame. And that got my gears going for doing pictures like that. And then you'll see that the third design that I do on this sheet is indeed a design for a picture with some indication of what the frame design would be. So now I'm drawing a candelabra, and it is heavily inspired by this incredible silver cross that I saw at the Opera del Duomo Museum. It was this giant thing, it must have been 5 to 6 feet tall, if I remember right. And it had all of these inlaid jewels and all of these sculptures of saints on it and this incredible crucifix at the top. But I wanted to do this next, I think, because I did the first sketch is sort of like big scale sculpture. It's saying like, this is what's in their plazas, right? They like to go for sculpture for big scale things. But then I also wanted to do a design to show that they don't let up there, right? It's opulence, it's Baroque, it's Italian Baroque style. So they go for sculpture everywhere. It's on the big stuff and the little stuff, which is exciting for me because I love drawing figures. So if they're a core part of the design form language for this project, it's just really fun and easy for me to be like, all right, I'm drawing a small thing. How do I make it fit the form language? Put some sculptures of figures on it. And I'm drawing a big thing. Let's put some statues on it. That's nice. It fits well. So the actual cross that inspired me to do something like this is classy and beautiful and good. So of course it's just like silver with jeweled colored accents here and there. But as I was thinking about this more and more, and as I was reacting to what I did with the stone statue to the left there, I was looking at that and I was like, well, I like where I'm going with what their statues depict, right? Like some depictions of the battle for heaven. And I like the darkness and the demonic aspects being mixed with these classical statue designs. But what I didn't like was that the uniformity of the stone made it look too classical, like made it feel too calm. What's the word I'm looking for? It's just too not garish for the demons, you know? It's got to be wilder. So you see, when I go to color these next two designs, I try out really aggressive color. I try out really garish colors. It works with the markers, but then it also works for, I don't know, a lot of what you see in the Baroque basilicas, for example, that are all over Florence and Rome. When you go inside these things, they are every color. Like they paint the ceilings with these incredible frescoes that have blues, pinks, oranges. The flesh of demons, if you're looking at a painting of hell, is like all different colors. They're like rainbow colored demons. And they don't just use one color. They don't just use one color of stone or marble like they tend to do in like Paris, for example. They use tricolor, right? Like they've got red marble, green marble, white marble, yellow marble. They gild things in gold. So it's actually super colorful. And, you know, that's why nowadays Baroque work sort of looks and means like over the top, like really kind of really, really strong, probably too strong. But to me, it feels like a good fit for the Fallen, right? Because we've already seen them depicted as sort of really dark, right? Like obviously, like, ooh, it's the devil, like really dark. But if we think of Pandemonium as their home that they made for themselves, as sort of like them insisting upon, no, we are still glorious, we are still beautiful and proud after the fall, and this imperial substance cannot fail. If it's that tone, it makes sense to me that they would, just with no false humility, they would represent themselves in their artworks, right? Because that's what this is. It's them making these sculptures, making these candelabras, doing these paintings of themselves and their fall and their conflict with God. They would do it, we're the best. Like, here's the color, here's the gold, here's the silver, here's the jewels, just wow, over the top, you know, just really honoring themselves in a narcissistic and like emotionally insisting way, you know. And I think the colorful over-the-top Baroque thing actually makes sense for that art direction wise, and it's also a total excuse for me to just indulge my horrible taste, so that definitely works for me. All right, and here we have my picture-in-picture madness, sketching that in. Both this sketch and the previous sketch were just sketched with 0.5 mechanical pencil, a couple different ones. The pencil doesn't matter. The only thing it changes is the weight in your hand. So it's just personal preference, because all that touches the paper is the lead. And I just use standard HB lead from the Office store. I think it's a Pentel brand. You'd find it in any pencil. It'd be the standard HB lead that's loaded with any pencil probably. So yeah, I just sketched a little picture of a bunch of Fallen flying through the sky and getting ready to do combat and all that. This stuff is fun, you know. I have enough comfort with doing a simple drawing of a bunch of figures leaping through the air at this point that I can just reasonably say to myself, like, yeah, design a few of these pictures so that they can hang on walls and shadowed basilicas and adorn hallways and ostentatious villas. I can just make a few of these and lay them out. And these are design drawings for that picture, right? Like the marker version of that painting that I do would not be the painting, right? You wouldn't like scan that and then put it as a texture on this thing if you were going to make a 3D experience out of this design or something like that. I would then need to do, if I liked it a lot and I was like, yeah, this is worth doing, I'd need to go in and do a second pass where I actually like paint it up and make it a real picture. It is a design sketch for a picture. So yeah, picture in picture, total craziness. But, you know, paintings say a lot about a culture. You know, they say a lot about how that culture thinks of itself and what they're interested in depicting and what the artists of that are interested in depicting. So it's a perfectly valid thing to design because it's saying something about the environment. Just like all of the motorcycles and muscle cars that are constantly ripping down my street right at my window are saying something about my environment. All right, so now I've taken again, this is a Staedtler Pigment liner, I believe. This is their drawing pen line. That means nothing to me. I just have all of these in a big drawer next to my table, and I just grab ones that will do what I need. I don't even remember when I bought these. I've only got one of this one, I think maybe one or two. So I don't even know where it came from. It looks like I may have bought it in Japan or maybe a Kinikuya or something like that. I don't know. But that's what it is. It's a really small size. I think it's I'm looking for it on my desk if I have it here. Like a 0.1 or one of the 0.05s. But it doesn't really matter. It's the same as all of the other ink liners that I've been using. I have a bunch of microns. Microns are probably the most popular and accessible ones of these. Microns are great. So don't feel like you need to go out and grab what I'm using if you want to do drawing like this. Like any waterproof pigment liner will give you these results. And just run tests. You know, I keep my little sketchbook open next to this big one while I'm doing this. You'll see it in frame later on as we do some of the marker stuff. But my little sketchbook is open right off screen because it's the same paper as the one that I'm working on here. It's just a smaller Moleskine. And if I have any questions about the material, I'm just testing it on a scrap page in there. I'm putting down a line of a pen that I want to try to use, letting it dry for a second, and then I'm rubbing markers over it to see if it will bleed or if it's going to fuzz out or something like that. So have a piece of scrap paper out, you know, just give yourself some little tests to see if the thing that you're going to do is going to work. That's especially useful with marker and watercolor work to spot the color you're about to use on another piece of paper and see if it's really going to go down the way that you think it's going to go down. It requires some patience. It's really easy to get go fever while you're doing this stuff and not want to do it and just, screw it, I'm just going to throw it down on the paper. None of us can avoid it. We all wind up doing it, I think, but it's usually a good idea to test just for a second before you just keep a little scrap of the same paper underneath your hand and you just spot the color right there before it goes down and make sure that it's the color that you thought it was. So I'm doing all the little details on this thing, making them up. At this point, I had started to realize that I did not like the way the first drawing of the statue came out very much at all because I felt like I had really tightened. I had started locking down. And as I was doing the candelabra, I wanted to sketch more with the ink. So I tried. So you can see like on the two lower figures, especially on their robes, I get some sketchy lines. Like I really just threw them as if I was holding a pencil. But it still wasn't quite there. And I think that ultimately was because I'm not used to those felt tips anymore. They really have a lot of friction that makes me just slow down a lot and thereby makes me lock down. So I fought against that. And I think what switched that around for me was realizing that my fountain pen can survive marker. The metal tip of my fountain pen these days is like my favorite thing to draw with. So you see that I do the last drawing with my fountain pen instead. And that, because I've spent all of my time with the fountain pen just sketching, just doing much more natural drawing, sketching lines with it, it just comes out much more sketchy. It has more the feel that I'm looking for. Just by the nature of that tool, it has less friction, it glides along the surface, and I have a lot of mileage drawing freely with that, whereas most of the mileage and mental associations I have with those pigment liners is locking down and getting stiff. So I think I'll probably use my fountain pen for a lot more of the designing and drawing on this project as we move forward, because there you can see I'm spotting a red over some lines in my sketchbook. Oh my God, I think that was the moment that I realized I could use markers on my fountain pen. Like, I didn't care I was going over that weird little figure. I just needed to see if that red was the red that I thought it was. And I just threw it over that, expecting it to make the pen bleed out. And I think you saw me pause there for a second, like, what the hell? The lines are fine. And now I'm like filling in the drawing, but my eye is flipping over there like, wait, seriously? I can put marker over my fountain pen? So yeah, I think you'll see me use that. I plan on using that much more for the upcoming drawings because I can just sketch and design happier, more freely, more high contrast with the fountain pen. And then I don't need to redo it, right? I can just put some colors right over those fountain pen lines. So I think that seems like a more direct path for me. Pencil is very free for me to design with, but pencil is just very light no matter what. And as you darken it, it gets very dirty. It loses its clarity as it gets darker, which is one of the reasons pencil drawings are so hard to do. It takes a lot of time to clean that up and to balance that. So I sketch with the pencil first so that I draw freely. It's definitely the medium that I draw the most freely with. That's how I can get what I consider to be my shapes. But then to keep it clear for these design drawings, I have to lock it down with something. I got to put ink or something over it. But the fountain pen is a good middle ground because I draw at this point, because I've drawn with the fountain pen enough, mostly when just warming up. It's my favorite warming up tool before I go do digital or whatever. I draw very freely with the fountain pen, but it is high contrast and clear the whole time, unlike pencil, and I can put some colors over it. It's not perfect. It bleeds a little, especially when you put the very light colors over it. But when you put the stronger saturated colors or darker colors over it, it really doesn't look like it bleeds. The contrast of the color and the value on the darker markers makes the little bit of bleeding that it does pretty unnoticeable. It is noticeable on the lighter values. If you start rubbing like a C1, that's to say a cool gray number 1, so a very light cool gray, or any of the very light grays over it, you can see that it bleeds out a little bit. So yes, I made this candelabra rather garish. I was imagining some sort of painted or tinted metal or something like that, which I actually don't think is that really possible? I don't know. Can you do tinted metals? Let's see. I don't think so. Not like what I'm imagining. You know, everything that you see that is that, like a car, for example, is actually, it's a very thick paint job with like clear coat over it. You can't just get straight up metal that's not powder coated to be just red, I don't think. But, they have satanic techniques. They're devils. They're so good at working this stuff that they can do things that we can't do, right? Right. Everybody agrees. Okay, cool. So red, green, lilacs, purples, just weird colors. Definitely only the start of experimenting with what the baroque color usage could be in the land of Pandemonium. But I think I could get away with a lot of it by making stuff like that red arabesque that is making up the middle of the candelabra. I think I could just say, or I want to say, that that's just like a big carved ruby, like an impossibly worked ruby, because there's a memorable line in Paradise Lost where Milton explains that hell is richer than you can imagine in gold and rubies and sapphires, precious metals. And he uses that to scold people against boasting of their earthly wealth and their desire for those things, because these spirits reprobate sit upon a land that is blighted and yet produces it in abundance. It's like, why do you want what the devils have? So I think that I might be able to say that the overall design language of Pandemonium is it's St. Peter's Basilica plus rubies. It's St. Peter's Basilica plus more precious metals. So it's only more over the top. Good luck to me. That's all I have to say. So now I'm using my fountain pen. Now I have gone in there and done all of the decorative elements on that frame. And that took a while. You know, I didn't show all the recording of it, or I didn't record all of it because it was super boring, slow, painstaking work. But it takes a while. Don't let this video trick you into thinking it doesn't take a while. These drawings are simple, but because I'm trying to think things through and do stuff that I don't normally do, and I'm working with mediums that I don't normally work with, this sheet that just has 3 designs on it took hours and hours and hours. Like, I don't know. God, how long was that? Probably like 10 hours or something like that, which is, like I said, if I had done any of these as a pencil drawing, it would have been like a 30-hour pencil drawing. So it's still faster, but don't think that this is quick. You know, I go real slow on this stuff. That doing all of the tracery on that frame probably took an hour on its own, you know, and when you sit down to draw, you might think, oh, in an hour, I should get a whole picture, you know, something decent, like a whole figure or something like that. And the painful truth is, nah, man, no way. That takes way longer than that. Even if you've been doing this for a long time, it takes way longer than that. And, you know, that's one of the reasons stuff doesn't get made. You know, it's really hard to every day sit down and commit yourself. It's just like, all right, here goes 4 hours, 5 hours or whatever doing this thing. But it's the only way stuff gets made. That's the only way sketches like that crazy frame ever get made. I just had to sit there, put on some music, put on some YouTube videos, and just crawl through it and just insist on getting it done. And it's hard. I know it's hard because you're sitting there and you're doing that, but because it's repetitive work and it's not summoning your full engagement, you constantly, your brain instead is like, oh, well, I'll use my creative faculties to instead invent 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't be doing this instead. See, our problem as artists is that we are creatives, and we like to think that because we're creatives, we're only creative in our creative endeavors. I'm creative about drawing. No, you're just creative. And what that means is that you are very good at inventing things and feeling them so deeply that they want to feel real, and you need to make them real. That's why you make drawings, right? You invent things, things come to your mind, you create this narrative around it, you create this story around it, you're like, oh, I got to make a drawing so that it's real, it's concrete, it's a permanent artifact in the world, and other people can understand it. Turns out that same impulse is just always running, and it has no bias. It accepts everything as a appropriate vessel for its creativity. So your creativity is also expended on finding reasons to hate yourself and why this sucks and why you shouldn't be doing this and why you should quit forever. And you do the same thing that you do with your drawings. You carefully, the subconscious part of you carefully crafts this thing and makes it so compelling and makes the narrative so convincing and just makes it feel so real. And then you pick it up and you're like, ah, yes, it must be real. Real things require action. Real things must be taken seriously. Real things must be reacted to and incorporated into our identity. And before you know it, you've drank your own Kool-Aid and you know why you need to stop and not do this and not do the frame and not carefully do all the tracery and not spend another 3 hours on the drawing. And you should have had a better idea from the start, and maybe it'll go better tomorrow. And I need to plan more judiciously. And I need to get better tools. And I need to have the craft down better if I'm going to start on something this big. And before you know it, it's been 30 years and you haven't done anything. Fuck. So don't do that. Just don't pick up the story. Don't let your creativity trick you. It's your job as the good shepherd to put your creativity on the right tracks. And when little childish creativity is like, oh, let's spend 3 hours figuring out why we should quit and never do art again, just tap creativity on the head and say, nah, actually, creativity, that's not actually your lane. Yeah, your lane is you invest that manic creative energy, you invest it in the picture. You find ways to make the details and the shapes and the lines better and more interesting and exciting and new, and leave what we should or should not be doing to me, the virtuous side of me, the part of me that is trying to manifest my version of myself that I would prefer to be. You let me do that. and you try to limit the stories, and then creativity is going to look up at you and be like, you're an asshole. Like I'm creative too. Like I feel like I should have some agency in saying this stuff. And why is that always going to be your purview? Like, you're oppressing me. Like, I have an interesting opinion on why we should quit, and I think that you should hear it. And you just have to, at that point, exercise a little bit of child abuse and punch creativity in the face. Say, no. You're getting out of line. Just sit down right there and you make the drawing better. Instead of finding reasons why I shouldn't be doing this. I gave myself a headache with that crap. Okay. All right. So I filled the frame in with gold. You also see here that I only did 2 sides of the frame. And the reason for that is that I ran out of room. So there was some point when I was sketching that I realized that the frame wasn't going to fit on the page. And I could have got the whole thing framed up if I awkwardly cropped. Obviously, I could have redrawn everything, but for a design sketch, I was like, all right, this is good. I'll roll with it. It's fine. I could have redrawn it, or I could have recropped it. I could have cut off more of the top and the right side. But the way that I had drawn the figures, they were close enough to the edge of the paper that I just felt like I would have got an odd crop. I would have like lost that top figure's hand holding the spear. I would have lost a bunch of like a weird cropping on the right on the 2 figures on the right. I would have got a weird cropping on their legs and their feet. So I just said, no, screw it. Let's just let the meat of the picture, the thing that I'm actually designing. Well, I did design the frame, right? It's down there in the bottom in the left and the bottom. But the other thing that this is a design of, the actual picture itself, why ruin it just to make this weird little design drawing more complete? I bit the bullet on it. Maybe I regret it, whatever, who cares? But digital, when I lay this out in a book, if I take this all the way to the final step of putting this together as a folio, I also knew I could just take that in Photoshop, duplicate it, flip it, rebuild the corners, and I could probably put together a pretty good little composite version of it that will frame it up completely without having to draw very much new. There's always fixes you can do. That's fine. So a little bit of tricky duplicating in Photoshop probably let me fix that. So I'm in here with my colored markers, and I'm making all of the demons different colors. I like the idea that the fallen are by turns yellow, pink, blue, lilac, lime green, like all sorts of weird colors, because they can actually be any shape. They can be anything. They can become animals. They can take any form, vaguely humanoid, completely monstrous, totally ethereal. They can be whatever. So they're really open to playing with. All right, a lot of tricky gradient tricks here. I'm giving them these parrot or like bird of paradise flower color scheme wings. I've always thought just angels having white wings and demons having black wings or bat wings is like there's so many beautiful wings. That's so boring. Like any pigeon's wings are way cooler than that. So I just always try when I do this to just remember the gorgeousness that I've seen on tropical birds on something like that, and just do a bit of a reach and try to find something a little bit more interesting. And I also did a bunch of, like we were saying, flooding and gradient tricks there. So you see I have like 4 markers in my hand. So I'm putting down a pool of green, I'm flooding it, then I'm juicing a little blue into it, then I'm going back with the green and blending out the blue. So I get a little bit of a soft transition. Then that's giving me the variegated green part to the wings. And I'm doing the same with the yellow and the orange feathers as well. And then I ruin it by doing some clouds and a too dark sky, but whatever. It was fun. So I used a warm gray marker that was very dark, very light, against this very fruity, like peachish color. And then that was giving me some sunsetish colors to the clouds. And then I just markered in this pool of blue in the background. And I tried to pull a transition with it. You'll see that I try to make the top of the sky a little bit bluer, and then as it goes to the bottom of the canvas, it gets a little bit greener, like a more jade color, which was me trying to allude to the sort of like sorbet color transitions that you get at Magic Hour, but I didn't really plan enough well for it. It didn't come out great, but who cares? That's fine. This, I believe you'll see me flubbing that gradient. My camera's memory card ran out somewhere here, but I think I got most of my attempt at the gradient. But I'll just say now that this does cut off a little bit suddenly, but you don't miss much. Like my camera cut off and then I just filled in a couple spots of the blue background and then called it a day. So there wasn't really much after that anyway. So I'm just carefully going around these guys. You see that I flood in that really bright, like peach color, that really saturated peach color for the cloud. See that I just lay it in flat, and this is 2x that this is playing at right now. It's got a slight speed up on it. I'm lingering on those pools of ink and flooding them, and then I'm coming in with the other color marker and just looking for a shadow side on those guys. And that's a warm marker, but the orange of that saturated fruity color is so orange and so warm that it makes that warm gray marker look cool by comparison. But they are both warm markers. Yeah, just going in there, punching it. Bread and butter stuff with markers. All right, so I think you get the idea there. I'll just wrap with some closing thoughts here. I want to say that this was really fun. This was some of the most fun that I've had designing in a while, and I'm glad that it worked, because taking on this project to make a few videos about design process, I design for work already, you know, and there's a reason that most of the work that's on this YouTube channel is pencil drawings, you know, just illustration-y, fine arty pencil drawings and random digital paintings and stuff like that. It's because I spend enough time doing design work that it's really hard to commit to, like, all right, am I just going to then continue to do the same kind of thing when I'm doing the stuff that I put out in public? It was always really hard for me to come to grips with that, but I did want to do it. I just needed to find something that I really wanted to do and a way to do it. And the good thing about doing it traditional like this is that it's different enough that it makes me very interested. And the fact that the project is scoped out big enough that it's like, it doesn't matter if you spend one day doing markers, one day doing watercolors, one day doing digital, one day doing encaustic paint that you're painting onto your body or whatever. That sort of triggered me to, like, all right, let's do it. Let's start throwing some of this down and recording some of this, because on smaller scale design ideas, it feels weird to allow that. You know, you kind of want the look, the medium to be consistent throughout, because it's just smaller in scale. There's less things that you're trying to cover. And yeah, that almost always was like, all right, well, probably going to finish digital because that's the easiest way to get a tight finish for a number of assets. So then I'm just going to it's just more time in front of the computer. And I don't get to look at a piece of paper instead. When, if I'm doing a design job, I've already been looking at the computer for hours and hours a day. It's like, it's really hard to commit to that. So the fact that this scoped out, and it was like, it couldn't possibly matter if you spend a bunch of drawings working traditional while you try to because there's just so many ideas that need to be had. That seemed very, very useful. Made it easier for me to bite the bullet. And who knows, maybe I just won't do any digital for this project here, because this isn't a quote unquote real design book that I'm trying to put together that I'm trying to send to a particular company or something like that, right? If you were going to do this with that goal in mind, you would probably want it to be in the medium that company needs. For most companies these days, it's digital, right? But this is more about finding some way for me to share with you guys what a design process looks like and what kind of work you can do to actually fill out a design folio book. So it's not really, it doesn't hinge on that. It's not required. So yeah, good, exciting. I don't really need to do digital stuff, which is important to me for my own personal time. I need to be able to switch things up to spend the amount of time that I do drawing personal work and work, or else otherwise I'd completely burn out. If I was just doing the same thing for both, it's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen. So we'll see. It would wind up being a very stylized book, probably a very inconsistent book too, because I just don't have, I can be consistent with digital because I have so much mileage with it. But when I do traditional stuff like this, unless it's pencil, I haven't really spent enough time with any one particular thing, like markers, for example, for it to be perfectly consistent. But that's fun and experimental tool. Maybe I'd get a concept book that looks like what OG concept art from like the 70s and 80s look like, like Zelda player's manual stuff. I don't know. That's pretty exciting. We'll see what happens. Let's keep it open. All right. Thank you for drawing today.